Okay, well, that's the end of the presentations. Now is the time for your questions and answer, panel discussions, and so forth.
Yeah, well, my question is involved in terms of coordinating efforts and collaboration like you want. I would think that if AASHTO wants more precipitation of us to get involved in it, to be more active and to come like joint committee meetings at different events like this that we're involved, have to be involved with, or going to be involved with on a normal basis, so we can collaborate at setting up a committee meeting to jointly, work through some of the issues. That way, either you go an ASCE Structures Congress, you're going to an ASCE, but you're going to where the professionals are going to be and try and jointly get a committee meeting with those organizations to pull, it's just a comment, to pull together the intel you need to collaborate properly. I think that would be better than sometimes, because the one I attended happened to be a T10 or a T13 at a PCI or a National Concrete Bridge Conference where your members are there as well, and you happen to have a committee meeting. I wanted to see how the process worked. I stepped into it. Very fascinating how it works. Who was presenting was a member of ACI. I knew him. It was like, oh, I know that guy. It was like, okay, cool. I didn't know that you could do that. Again, the presentation you gave kind of answered my question about how to get involved. Anybody can make the initiative. You just have to get a DOT to back your initiative, and then you can present and hopefully get it through the process that you've described.
Absolutely.
But the collaboration, I think, needs to be able to almost, if you're going to reach out to where we're already at and try and jointly can connect that way as well. And that's a very important point that we're trying to do here, I think, too.
Yeah, exactly. That this session is probably a first step to try to formalize a relationship between ACI and AASHTO.
Okay.
We're doing it through this seismic group. Mervyn is the friend of AASHTO T3 and chair of ACI's Seismic Bridge Committee. So Monique is a member of ACI 341 and the chair of the TRB committee. Ruth is the chair. You see, so we're trying to get that linkage, and this session came out of that. It will need to expand. Seismic bridge is pretty much concrete, right? It's not exclusive, but it's pretty much reinforced concrete. T10 is the concrete committee. That would seemingly be the committee that should be here. They're that all things concrete that happen to include seismic, but seismic sort of a spin-off. So that's one. A couple other thoughts to complete, weren't really questions, but I'll offer them up, is you don't have to go in the front door and meet with a chief bridge engineer from some state DOT and get their endorsement, on writing. It could come indirectly through emails, letters. It could go indirectly through TRB and Monique, who says, hey, this is a high priority research needs statement. We'll up it. It'll get to Ruth. Ruth says,
that's what I want to discuss.
yes, yeah. So Ruth doesn't have to know who the author is. She can say, this, you're right. Holy cow, we've been doing this wrong. We've overlooked this very important topic, whatever. So it's not like you have to be a friend, personal or otherwise, with some chief bridge engineer, that you can get endorsement without that knowledge. That said, if you are working for a DOT, state DOT, you certainly could contact them directly. That is the state bridge engineer.
I just also have a short comment too. In addition to that, we recognize exactly what you said, and I think we've been all working on this effort as well. And if I can let the cat out the bag, I know even in ACI 341, hopefully we'll have a subcommittee, a liaison subcommittee, to also, Mormon, am I kind of formulating that path? I know that just kind of came out the committee meeting, so we're recognizing that we also need a space to formalize these connections, so we are working towards that as well.
Well, and I think a key takeaway from this gentleman was that we need to be here, where people are. So these joint committee meetings need to be where the talent is, not necessarily, hey, we're up in Washington, D.C. in January, come visit. So good.
Coordinated efforts with other
is better.
organizations having their conventions, and again, a game team can sponsor a meeting even at that convention if it's local to that.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can go around, because there's multiple conventions and committee meetings like that for different industry participants, and you can get those technical committees there with the
Sure.
right personnel to
Yep,
help
yep.
collaborate better.
Absolutely. A challenge that DOTs have is funding. Is that I am here as a private citizen, not as a representative of Alaska DOT. The Alaska DOT does not recognize ACI as a partner. So when I say, hey, I'd like you to attend, attend this meeting and so forth, it's certainly at their discretion. But they'll say, we don't need ACI, we have AASHTO, we have ourselves, we have our own testing materials, we have our own code. Well, I think we all know that that's not really true. Look at the concrete provisions in the LRFD code and you'll see a lot of 318, of course. One of the bridge committee members outside the seismic group made a good point, is that ACI used to have a stronger role in the AASHTO bridge code. So why not now? And one of the reasons they brought to bear was the adoption of the LRFD provisions, which unified flexure and shear and torsion and adopted the modified compression field theory and variations thereof. And that bifurcation led to, well, we're going to do our own things when it comes to concrete. The steel industry is not that way. When AISC manual is updated for axial loads on angles, AASHTO just essentially plagiarizes it. We retype it, but the two are mirrored still. They're linked together. There might be a lag between the two, but
I don't think they have to retype it. I think AISC hands it over.
it's the Word document. Yeah, they had to work. And
It's a
they're and good or bad, the steel industry has trade associations. So the National Steel Bridge Alliance is a consortium of steel fabricators, academics, and so forth. And they will fund and finance DOT travel and participation. So when you talk about the PCI, that is a group that is associated with AASHTO, and SBA is associated with the steel group. I'm a member of the T14 Steel Bridge Committee, and if my state won't pay, they will to get us there. They hold their meetings concurrent with AASHTO meetings, and that builds that relationship, good or bad. And so it's a pretty, it's a machine with money. I don't think ACI is going to get there. They don't have a trade association. But if the DOTs recognize ACI as a partner, a development partner in codes and so forth, then I think that barrier, that hurdle will go away. And this is the first step towards that. And it seems sort of obvious to me. There's clearly talent on both sides. We just really need to bring the two teams together and take advantage of this funding that AASHTO and TRB and NCHRP have and expertise that ACI has.
Okay, so this is I guess a question for everybody, not just everybody there, but everybody out here. So we have, in addition to everybody's at the front, we have Nestor, who is the chair of 342. Is anyone here from 343? Anybody members of 342, 343 in the audience? Okay. So the idea behind this session, there it is right there. Thank you, Elmer. ACI's role in bridge code development. So one thing I think that Lee said, and this was just a bit of an idea, if all states have to adapt AASHTO, but many states, as we know, go beyond or do things differently. California, South Carolina, Alaska has their own manual. Is there a role in some of these ACI documents where you could imagine a scenario where a state or a group of states wants to do something different and could look to these either existing or new ACI documents as things that could be adopted? So for example, displacement-based design, there could be an ACI 341 document on direct displacement-based design that for states who are interested in could say, hey, this is there, and it's mentioned in our upcoming AASHTO document. Here is the details of how you can do it. Let's just see this document, cut and paste. And that becomes, maybe it's interesting to California and Alaska and nobody else, and that's fine. Or maybe there's something that is of interest, to states that are dealing a lot with corrosion issues, and there's something that's, which the Bridge Deck Committee, 345 is it, or is a subcommittee of 342? Same thing, you can see where it could go. So I don't know the answer to that, but is there that possibility? Could you see a scenario, Elmer in Alaska or Ruth in California, any other state?
Well, Mervyn, that actually came up this morning in the 342, the Bridge Deck Committee. I said 345, okay.
You get the drift of more.
Yeah, well, and it was sustainability, right? Speaking of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act introduced a big emphasis on sustainable materials or materials that reduce, greenhouse gas production. And, currently I don't know if AASHTO nor FHWA has a lot of guidance on that. So we'll be looking to organizations that have much more experience with materials. So, and, similar to what, the steel industry, I keep going back to it because I spend a lot of time dealing with steel industry. They can very quickly, it seems like, put out a document, after something happens or if there's something of interest, they put out a document that they fill that space up with the information. And that doesn't necessarily make it a requirement or anything like that, but, they get that word out there. And so, I think there's the opportunity for an ACI very materials based. I don't know how much about structural design or design code development, but certainly when it comes to materials and getting information out about materials that might be sustainable but also durable, things like that. I think ACI could get out in front of that and be. That would be a way to be very visible within a new program area.
And Mervyn, to your point about, having let's say, almost like a guideline that is, instead of being developed under NCHRP, is developed in ACI. And there have been, over the years, some of the technical documents have been somewhat of that flavor. I would suggest that a way that would make them have more throw weight is to ensure that they're harmonized with the existing AASHTO document. And when I say harmonized, I mean using the same terminology, using same variables, using things as a language that if a designer picked it up and said, we want to develop a project-specific criteria, and here's the analysis and design method we're going to use, they don't have to translate anything. So I think that would enable quicker and more thorough collaboration.
To another point, Mervyn, you asked is, could a DOT adopt an ACI document? And the answer is yes, but. If the DOT were to adopt, say ACI had a document, I'm trying to think of something, I'll make it specific so that it's not so hard. Let's say there's an ACI document on seismic design of concrete bridges in cold climates, which Alaska is concerned about. And it addresses means and methods of quantifying very cold temperatures concurrent with a design seismic event that might embrittle the structure, reduce plastic deformations. The Department of Alaska DOT could adopt that document as is. We could plagiarize from it and incorporate those equations into our bridge design manual, or what we call Bridges and Structures Manual. But that manual goes to the Federal Highway Administration to review and approve, essentially, to apply with. In general, if we're doing something where there's a void, where there's these equations or techniques for addressing cold climate and seismic, it's probably going to be an easy sell. We should be doing something. Right now, AASHTO doesn't address that. There's no climate-based, no corrosion-based consideration for seismic performance of bridges. So I'm sure the Federal Highways would look at it and say, yeah, you should go above and beyond. This is clearly an issue for you. It's probably not a hard push. But let's say it was a topic that was more, plastic hinge length or something like that. And that some ACI document says, the analytical plastic hinge length times 2. Everything else is the same. They might say, whoa, that's unconservative. And they might bounce it if Alaska DOT wanted to adopt that. So there is some checks and balances. It's not like the DOT can just do whatever we want. We still need, I don't know that it's approval, but it's de facto approval from Federal Highways. They get our bridge manual, they review it, they give us feedback and comments, which is good. And eventually they sort of agree that, yes, that's it. But like the AASHTO spec, once you said you're going to do it, now do it. Don't just write it down and not do it. You got to follow through.
That's essentially correct, yeah. I mean, how that falls under the regulations, I think that's more of a sort of a programmatic design exception if you want to use the terms, but yeah, that's...
Well, I wanted to bring, perspective of what's happening right now in the committee. So 341, I don't know, Mervyn, if you have any actual code, but 342, 343, and 345. So 342 is evaluation. I'm the chair. 343 is design. Fortunately, Andy Foden is not here, is the incoming chair. And 345 is construction, which and Sam Keski is the chair right now. So we are not code committees. We don't write codes. We write mostly reports, guidelines, and I'm a member of the 342, 43, and 45, and we are actually, when we decide to develop a document, specifically we try to not replicate what AASHTO does, because really it wouldn't make much sense to rewrite what AASHTO is already doing and putting so much money and effort. So we try to identify things that are not really addressed directly in any AASHTO publication. So for example, in 342 evaluation, we're developing a couple of documents right now, which it may be a little bit in AASHTO, but we expand it a lot so that a bridge engineer in any state can is designing or evaluating, in this case, a bridge, and then doesn't find the guidelines to how to do it. AASHTO tells you you have to do this, this, and that, but how to do it? Then people start scratching their head. So our documents try to get to that gap. We say like, okay, you do this, this, and that. These are examples. So some of the guidelines have explicit examples of real bridges doing it, or photos when you're evaluating a bridge or something like that. And the design committee does the same thing. Is try to put reports and guidelines on how to design bridges, not necessarily, or I mean, following AASHTO with the same terminology and all that, but additional topics and how to do specific items in bridges. So I see that would be an interesting path to provide additional information to all the DOTs, in which we do, which they might find maybe by chance, say like, oh, look, ACI has a document on this that we, I mean, me as a practitioner, as a consultant, that's what happens. You have AASHTO, you know that you have to follow the code, but when you really are gonna pass the design to a junior engineer, say like, okay, but so how do we do it? Yes. And say like, oh, there is this ACI publication that is gonna help you, give you references, give you examples and all that. So that's the gap that we're trying to work, and that may be a good thing that we can bring into to AASHTO to say like, yeah, we develop it, and of course all the committee members work for free, we are volunteers and all that, and we can provide that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, that really is one of the focuses of this session, is that ACI has expertise and documents that are of value to practicing bridge engineers like me. And I don't think Alaska DOT is unusual in that ACI is not on our shelf. I don't know that I didn't know that there are 3 publications in the seismic committee. One of them is really cutting state-of-the-art, state-of-the-practice on pier walls. AASHTO is pretty lean on that topic. If all we succeed in is writing a ballot item that adds to the commentary, see these ACI documents for more information, we've won. Right now, not very much of that in the code. Better than that, I mean, it's a minimum threshold for success. A maximum might be Lee and I work on a ballot item to take that wall technical data, massage it into AASHTO language, bring it to T3, see if the committee agrees, and then if they do, we advance it to the committee as a whole. Do they agree? Yes, it gets adopted, and now we've expanded greatly on the design of wall piers under seismic loads, because right now it's pretty simple. So that, I think, would be much greater success. In the end of the day, I want code provisions that are good and reliable and accurate and helpful, and don't let me scratch in my head, which happens a lot, which goes to another, I guess, discussion is on research. I was telling our seismic group, the seismic committee has had a lot of research needs statements, and unfortunately many have been funded. As a practicing designer, I'm going through my calculations and I get to one of those head scratchers and I say, well, assume the following, or based on this off AASHTO reference, do the following, and is that right? Maybe we need to explore that gap, that knowledge gap. Prepare a research needs statement. How do I design wall piers for high seismic loads and allow for some ductility, or how do I account for that? That goes through the machine, and it ends up, in theory, with a ballot item that allows us to change or augment the code. That is open to all of you, and I don't know how many practitioners versus academics, but there's room for everyone. Lee is sort of a hybrid both, but I would say predominantly a practitioner. So he's like me, I know how to read code language, codify it. So when Mervyn, as an academic, provides research recommendations to the DOT, they're not code language. Right? It doesn't say you shall do this, you shall do that. It may have variables that are not the same as what AASHTO already has for that same term. So we'll take that language as readers of code and convert it into the same words. So for example, there might be a variable or an equation with variables in it. We'll define the variables in the same format the code does. There might be in the research report commentary, recommendations, guidance, but not code. You should not, when code is do this, you shall do this. Commentary is, here's why you do that. If you want more information on this, here's a resource. Here's some additional expansion on this topic. And a lot of times when we get academic ballot items, they've got code and commentary all messed up. It's like, no, you can't tell me on the commentary, oh, by the way, you shall be using high performance concrete. That doesn't go in the commentary. That's a shall. That's got to come over to the code. I got to do that. So again, there's room for everybody. That's sort of why we're here. And hopefully we can engage some of you guys in this AASHTO world, and when hopefully we can do the same through ACI.
So FHWA has like design examples and a lot of good resources, and I feel the same. Some of the younger engineers don't know that those exist. And you're talking about potentially referencing ACI in some of those commentaries. So I guess, is that feasible? Like we can do that even if we're not doing it for FHWA examples? Because it'd be nice to have both of them in there, right? Because
absolutely, I don't see why not. If you look through the commentary, you'll see references of all brands and species from generations gone by and new. The downside to references, well, I'm a big believer in references, but I'm also a minimalist. So if you look at the seismic guide specifications, the commentary will talk about a little bit about analytical plastic hinge length, and that it's an idealization, it's a convenience to simplify a complicated concept. For more information, see Priestley. You read the book. I'm not going to reproduce it here. Go get the book and buy it. You'll come out ahead. But we can write, and we referenced college textbooks. We referenced FHWA, AISC, ASCE documents from the past. Nathan Newmark documents that he published are still referenced in our AASHTO code. So yeah, I think if there's a document, that could be your ballot item. You say, there's a list of resources I have that nobody else seems to know about, but they're really helpful. Would you think you might want to add these to the commentary in that section? You bet. I don't see why we couldn't.
yeah, a lot of it seems older.
And that might be another research needs statement. Refresh these documents. Yeah.
But to your point, I would say, because I've done this, you go find a reference where there's a gap. And I want to tie Nestor's comment and yours together here. Hopefully I will. But if you use an outside document, the code's telling you to do something, and it doesn't tell you how to do it. And so you go find another document that kind of walks you through the path of the how to do it. It's on you as a designer or whoever stamped in the plans, the engineer of record, to make sure that whatever you're applying doesn't undo something unintentionally or conflict with something in the spec. That's your job to, again, harmonize that sort of thing so it's filling a gap, but it's not stepping on any toes of the spec so that you're in compliance with the shall side of the code. And I like the way Nestor put this, is you identify gaps and use the what, but the how's not specified. That would go into the ballot item. You might write a ballot item and it would be the background. Here's what the code says what you're to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. And now we're filling that in. But in the process of writing that ballot item, you'd have to consider whether there are other ways to do it that perhaps you should reference so that it's not exclusive. That's where, these industries that are watching from the side that are trying to sell their materials will jump on you. If, you call out something you shouldn't call out. So you do have to be careful, but the background would be, yeah, we're filling this gap. I think a great example seismically is there are methods of analysis, single mode spectral method, the multi-mode method, and there's some language about how to do, let's say, the single mode spectral method. Well, they said this is the what, and then eventually commentary was added about here's how you go through the process. And so filling gaps is what we want to do.
Another thought, please go to the mic, but another thought is if you're in one of the other bridge committees, if you can attend one of the ASHTO committees and find a friend and invite them to be ACI member of your committee, for example, which is how I'm a member. I've been a member of ACI since college. I just read the structural journal where everyone says, hey, I got free work out of him and Lee for years, so it's turnabout's fair play. Why don't you join our committee, help us be a liaison between the ASHTO and others. I think you'll find success there, but you have to reach out. Somebody has to be first.
I had a question on sort of the typical practice for ballot items coming to be, if you will. So it sounds like from your discussion that a lot of these are coming out of NCHRP synthesis, things like that. How often and how successful are efforts that an individual state takes where they'll have some individual state has a project and they come up with recommendations for that and they're like, hey, this could be a ballot item? Or is it still more typical to then get more state buy-in and still transition that to, say, NCHRP synthesis? So I guess how formalized does it have to be with the NCHRP process, or is it just like, hey, one state does this, it seems like a good idea, let's make a ballot item?
Well, it might come out of the NCHRP process, but it does not have to. On my organizational, that flow chart, there was state, federal highways, pool fund studies. There are various ways that you can get into the process. And really, politically, what you described, a state, hey, we're doing this, and it's not in the code. This would be good to be in the code. At the state level, often, the bridge engineers and their specialists working underneath them, they know, they might call Caltrans, hey, what are you guys doing on this? And Caltrans says, well, we're doing something slightly different, and all of a sudden the potential ballot item expands and gets tweaked. And sometimes those back conversations happen for a while before it's ever a formal ballot item. It's like there's some groundwork of kind of finding out what's out there. I know all the DOTs, like I'm in Washington State, I do a lot of work with Seattle DOT and a lot of work with WashDOT. Well, Seattle DOT wants to know what WashDOT's doing. WashDOT wants to know what Caltrans doing. Everybody wants to know what's going on out there. And so there's usually those kind of conversations before something comes up. Now, on the other hand, there could be, we just had this problem, and I'm pretty sure others might have it, and the code's not covering it, a state, and that would be a quick kind of fix, and get a lot of people behind it to move forward. And you can do some of those pretty quickly, and the smaller, the easier they are to get through.
Certainly errors and stuff like that. But it's sort of a larger example is the revisions to the strut and tie provisions that I mentioned. That largely came out of Texas due to issues that they were having with straddle bent caps and beam column joints. So they did the research through UT. Ozzie Bayrack did that, and then that led to a major revision of the strut and tie provisions in the LRFD that got passed through. I think some of that may have been helped that I think Texas has a long time been either the chair or the vice chair of the ASHTO T10 committee, but they have they build a lot of concrete bridges, so they have a vested interest in doing that, and that's sort of a good example of directly going from performance to an issue to solution that then gets in the code.
So to answer your question, I think but in the past, the DOTs really were the source of ballot items and change individually. But that really has changed. It's diminished, that now we rely on others to solve our problems. And CHRP is the primary solution to those problems and ballot items. But states still do it, as the examples I mentioned. A more recent example, Pennsylvania had some construction-related issues during a retrofit of a arch bridge and found a hole in the construction spec. They wrote the ballot item that fixed the hole for them and consequently said, this is a hole, we got to fix this. It's, it turned into a problem for them. Indirectly, I think some states have expertise beyond other states and topics. I'll go with Caltrans as an easy one. They are a generation ahead of the AASHTO specifications. The AASHTO seismic guide spec is like Caltrans seismic design criteria version 1, and they're on to number 2. And the next stage for AASHTO will be to advance the seismic guide spec. There's discussion, should we remove the force-based provisions in their entirety? It will happen, it's just really a question of when. And when we do, how do we accommodate the displacement-based specifications? Do we make it a Division 1A, so if you're old like me, remember it's sort of a standalone appendix, a Division 1A? Or do we try to blend it back into the document? Is it a separate document? These are questions that have to be answered. And at that time, might be a convenient opportunity to take Caltrans seismic design criteria version 2 and the recently published guidelines for performance-based seismic design, update everything, bring them in, get another decade out of that, and then repeat the process as Caltrans moves forward into version 3. So I think there really is, there still are states developing ballot items directly. As Lee said, the smaller they are, the easier to get through. When you're just plugging a hole, that's a pretty easy one. When you're creating a whole new guide specification, that wasn't on Caltrans. That came out of the T3 and the AASHTO as a whole. We recognized we needed something different. It wasn't necessarily displacement-based, but that's where we ended up. But when we ended up there, lifted heavily from California, South Carolina, Washington, and Oregon.
So what's the time frame for like plugging a hole? For instance, like
In the Pennsylvania case, it was one cycle, but there are changes in the way the AASHTO codes are published. So for example, right now, well, again, I'll back up. If you're older and your hair's gray like me, there was a day where you get interim specifications every year, and they were a different color page. You pull out a page, you stick in a page. And that was, I kind of didn't like it, but in hindsight, that was the good old days. Then we got to this, this, I'll call it weird approach where you just insert pages, and that's not very helpful. We've got to a point now, they said every third year, we're going to publish a brand new code, and all 3 years worth of ballots will be brought forward into that one code. So instead of annually, you'll really just see new code published and errata, not interims. So where our contract documents might say 2020 version of the LRFD and latest interims, it'll just say 2023, 2020, whatever, and errata.
More consistent with the International Building Code.
Yeah,
Does the
that's
same.
right. So hopefully this works. Cross your fingers. It's our first attempt at that. So the time is up. I thank our speakers, Derek, Lee, Monique, and Ruth. Thanks all of you personally and professionally. Thank you.